Hey there, ready to get philosophical? You've handed us Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and let me tell you, this deep dive is less about conquering barbarians and more about conquering ourselves.
Yeah.
We're looking at Gregory Hayes's translation, and what's so cool is that these writings were never meant for us.
Right.
They're his private journals, a Roman emperor's personal playbook for navigating life's chaos.
That's what makes them so captivating.
Right.
It's like we're peeking behind the curtain of power, seeing the doubts and struggles of a man who seemed to have it all.
Right. It's 161 AD, plagues are raging, the empire's teetering, and here's Marcus Aurelius jotting down thoughts about virtue and self-improvement. Talk about relatable content.
It's fascinating because it challenges this image of Stoicism as cold and unfeeling.
Okay.
Here's a man facing very real turmoil, yet he finds solace in philosophy, this idea that inner peace comes from accepting what you can't control and focusing on what you can.
Okay, so in the spirit of full transparency, I geeked out a bit and found this old manuscript where the title is simply "To Himself." I mean, how much more personal can you get?
It underscores that this wasn't a PR stunt. These were his raw, unfiltered thoughts, which makes his insights even more powerful.
It's like we're getting the uncut version, no filter. So book 1, Debts and Lessons, it's basically Marcus giving shout-outs to the people who shaped him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just list names, he tells these vivid little stories that bring them to life.
And these aren't just any mentors. They are key figures who instilled in him the principles of Stoicism, like Apollonius, who taught Marcus about being ruthlessly independent, someone you could always rely on.
And get this, Apollonius emphasized living by logos, basically universal reason. It's this idea that there's a rational order to the universe and we need to align ourselves with it.
Exactly. And this is crucial to understanding Stoicism. Imagine it like this logos is the underlying code of the universe. And by understanding and living in harmony with it, we find true freedom and happiness.
It's like finding the source code to a perfectly run program. But back to Marcus's mentors, he talks about Rusticus, who introduced him to another Stoic heavyweight, Epictetus.
Talk about name dropping.
But it's not just about the names. Rusticus taught Marcus to value substance over style. Think clear, direct communication, avoiding empty rhetoric, which, let's be honest, is a skill we could all use a bit more of today.
Oh, absolutely. It's like that friend who cuts through all the drama and tells you straight up what's what. Then there's Maximus, this paragon of self-control and generosity. Marcus clearly idolized this guy.
And this is where we see Stoicism in action. Maximus wasn't just born perfect. He cultivated these virtues through practice and discipline, serving as a living example of what Marcus aspired to.
It's giving role model goals, for sure. But here's where it gets really interesting. Marcus starts book 1 by expressing gratitude to the gods, which seems kind of off-brand for a Stoic, right?
Right. It's one of those intriguing tensions we encounter throughout the Meditations. How does this very personal gratitude square with this impersonal logos governing the universe? It's a question that lingers as we dive deeper into Marcus's world.
It's like he's wrestling with this idea of a higher power, while trying to find his own inner strength.
Yeah, and that tension is something I think a lot of people can relate to even today. But let's move on from those big existential questions.
Okay.
Let's talk about some of the other themes that run through the Meditations, like our mortality. Marcus had a knack for capturing this really heavy topic with really vivid imagery.
Oh yeah, like that line about human lives being like many lumps of incense on the same altar, burning out one after another.
Right.
It's beautiful, but also kind of sends shivers down your spine.
Absolutely, and that's classic Stoicism. Death is inevitable, a natural part of life's cycle. But what's fascinating is that Marcus doesn't shy away from the melancholy that comes with that realization. He doesn't just preach acceptance, he feels it grapples with it.
It makes him seem more human, more relatable.
Definitely. He's not just a philosopher king on a pedestal. He's right there with us, facing the same existential dread we all do. And that's where the practical advice he gives himself, and in a way, us, comes in. It's not all abstract theories. It's like, hey, having a tough time getting out of bed, try this.
Right. I love those parts. It's like getting a pep talk from a Roman emperor who also struggled with the snooze button.
And those little pep talks are rooted in the Stoic disciplines of perception, action, and will. It's about controlling your thoughts, that's perception, and acting according to your values, that's action, and accepting what you can't change, which is the will part.
So it's like a framework for dealing with any situation, big or small.
Precisely. It's about cultivating that inner strength and resilience to face whatever life throws at you. But speaking of facing things head on, let's talk about this interesting contrast in Marcus's writing. On one hand, he finds so much peace and beauty in nature, but then he turns around and throws shade at humanity.
Yeah, he's all about finding solace in the natural world, but then he's like, people are the worst, comparing them to dogs snarling and quarreling children. What's up with that?
It's definitely a head-scratcher, right? It could be that as emperor, he was constantly surrounded by the worst of human behavior, power struggles, betrayals, you name it. Maybe he craved the simplicity and honesty he found in nature.
Yeah, kind of like seeking refuge from the drama of the Roman Senate in a quiet garden.
Exactly. And remember, he was writing for himself, not to win a popularity contest. But this tension also makes you wonder, did he ever truly reconcile his Stoic ideals with the reality of leading a very flawed and messy empire?
It's like he was stuck between wanting to be this perfect Stoic sage and having to deal with the daily grind of ruling an empire.
Right. And speaking of philosophical dilemmas, we can't forget about the Epicureans, the Stoics' philosophical rivals. They believed in pleasure and a random universe, total opposites.
Yeah, it was like Team Stoic versus Team Epicurean. Marcus even says Providence or atoms, like it's this big life-altering choice.
And here's the thing, even though Marcus was a diehard Stoic, there are moments where he seems to borrow wisdom from the Epicureans. It shows that he wasn't afraid to consider different perspectives to be a true seeker of wisdom.
It's like he's saying, hey, I'm a Roman emperor, but I still haven't figured it all out. Let's keep exploring.
Exactly. And that openness to different ideas is something we can all learn from. It reminds me of a passage where Marcus talks about being grateful for his teachers, even the ones who challenged his views.
That's interesting because you'd think a guy in his position would just surround himself with yes men.
Right. But he seems to genuinely value intellectual honesty and the pursuit of truth, even if it means questioning his own beliefs. And speaking of beliefs, one thing that struck me is how Marcus approaches this idea of the gods.
Oh yeah, we touched on this earlier. How does this fit in with Stoicism? It seems like he goes back and forth between this impersonal logos and then acknowledging these individual gods.
It's definitely one of the most complex and debated aspects of his writing. You're right, on one hand, he's all about logos, this rational order of the universe. But then he'll thank the gods for specific things, almost like he's praying.
Yeah, like when he talks about receiving remedies granted through dreams, it's like, did he really believe that, or was he just hedging his bets?
It's hard to say for sure, but there's this one line that really gets me thinking. He says something like, I know the gods exist because I've felt their power. It suggests that for him, this wasn't just theoretical, it was a deeply personal experience.
Yeah, maybe it's not about choosing one or the other, logos or personal gods, but recognizing that there are some things we just can't fully explain with reason alone.
That's a really interesting thought, and it speaks to that human need to connect with something larger than ourselves, even if we don't fully understand it. And maybe that's okay.
It's like he's giving us permission to embrace both the rational and the spiritual, even if it seems contradictory.
Exactly. And isn't that kind of freeing? To acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, but to keep searching, keep exploring.
I have to admit, diving into the meditations has been a wild ride. It's inspiring, thought-provoking, and honestly a little depressing at times.
I hear you. It's not all sunshine and roses, but that's what makes it so real, so relatable. Marcus isn't
And isn't that what we all need? Not just empty platitudes, but real guidance for navigating the messiness of life.
Right. And his advice, even though it's coming from a Roman emperor, is surprisingly practical.
Yeah.
Focus on what you can control, act with virtue, accept what you can't change. It's timeless wisdom that's still relevant today.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Marcus Aurelius's meditations, what's the one thing you hope our listener walks away with? What's the big takeaway?
I think it's this: even emperors have doubts, fears, and struggles. But what sets Marcus Aurelius apart is his commitment to self-improvement, to living a life guided by reason and virtue, even when it was hard. And that's something we can all aspire to, no matter our circumstances.
Beautifully said. And who knows, maybe by reflecting on his words, we can all find a little more peace, purpose, and maybe even a little bit of wisdom in our own lives. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep those journals handy. You never know who might be reading them centuries from now.